Hi, I'm Rosalie Kareem. I am a transformational somatic trauma healing coach. And this is one in a series of videos called Understanding Developmental Trauma and Healing. My passion and vision is that everyone who has a history of developmental trauma will have free and abundant access to information and resources that really help, so that you feel seen and understood, so that you understand and appreciate yourself better, realizing where you've come from and where you are and how much you have done, and so that you have a variety of options for ways that you can support and accelerate your own healing journey, regardless of whether or not you are also working with a trauma healing facilitator or group. I'm glad that you're here. I hope you find this information helpful and useful, and thank you for being you. I want to talk about developmental trauma. What is developmental trauma? What is developmental trauma recovery? What does recovery from developmental trauma look like or consist of? Does your life seem like it's more uncomfortable or more difficult or more stressful than it really should be, just looking at the circumstances of your life? And has it kind of been that way for much or all of your life? If so, then it's quite possible that you are living with the effects, the lifelong effects of developmental trauma. Or is it difficult for you to trust or relate to or connect to other people in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense? Again, if that's the case, there's a possibility that you may have been affected by developmental trauma and still be living with the results of that. Now, there are other things that can cause these kinds of challenges, so I'm not trying to diagnose you, but I want to suggest that that's a possibility. And so I want to explain now what developmental trauma is, what happens when there's developmental trauma and it's unresolved, what is the experience at the time, and then what are the results of that experience, and then what does the process look like of moving from this place where our lives are profoundly impacted and limited by past developmental trauma to a place where we can be relatively at ease, relatively free to live our lives and free to connect with other people and able to feel good. What does that mean? What does it look like? What's required? How do I get from here to feeling better? Right? That's what I'm going to talk about just in brief in this talk. So one way of describing an experience of trauma is that it's a situation where I feel like profoundly unsafe, significantly unsafe, under threat, at risk. I feel unsafe, and my needs are not being met, and I feel overwhelmed. These are sort of some of the defining components of trauma. And this can happen in a single instance, or it can happen periodically over time, or there can be a prolonged experience where I feel unsafe and my needs aren't met continuously for days, weeks, months, or years. And so any of those can constitute trauma, and developmental trauma means that these experience of unsafety and overwhelmed and not having my needs met, that this happened when I was quite small. It could be even before birth, and it could be anywhere up to the age of, perhaps 10 or 12 years old. Many of us had really particularly difficult experiences, even when we were quite small, 0 or 1 or 2 years old. And when we talk about trauma healing, we're talking about instances of trauma that are unresolved. It's possible to have a traumatic experience and then have it mended, be seen and supported, and come back to pretty much your original baseline. So we're talking about unresolved experiences of trauma. So what happens in an unresolved experience of trauma, what happens is that I feel unsafe, and so I have the emotions associated with that lack of safety. Terror, confusion, abandonment, the very unpleasant and very intense emotions. Right? I experience those in my body. In the case of a young child, I experience those in my little body, right, where I'm already fairly helpless. Right, as young children, we're dependent on adults for pretty much everything. So we're already kind of helpless, and then whatever happens, and I'm scared. I am so scared, and I don't know what to do. There's nothing that it seems like I can do to create safety for myself. And so what happens is our system gets overwhelmed, right? There's this intense, unpleasant emotion, and it's just too much. And so then at some point, basically the wisdom of our body and our nervous system takes over, and that feeling of intense emotion gets set to the side, and this sort of freeze or shutdown comes in, right? Like I disconnect. I'm no longer really present to the experience. There's maybe a shell of me there, might even faint or pass out, but most of me is no longer present. And then the experience continues, and eventually it ends. Now, in some cases, again, this could be years, but eventually, the risk is no longer there. But that significant emotion, that profoundly unpleasant terror, distress, whatever the emotion was, a combination of several emotions, all of that remains hidden even after the situation is completely resolved. And the reason the emotion gets hidden in the first place, and the reason it stays there, is because that's the way we're designed as humans. We're designed, there's the wisdom that says that if I'm experiencing an overwhelming and unbearable emotion, I will not be able to, fend off threats and protect myself, protect my family, do what needs to be done, right? Our body knows that we need to function, right? Survival depends on being able to function. And so for the sake of survival, really intense emotions, our body has various ways of making them go away. So, an experience of trauma, it's overwhelming, it's terrifying, and then something later on might evoke those feelings coming back up. Maybe a similar threat, or maybe a profoundly safe place, and the feelings want to come up. But as those difficult feelings come up, my brain and or my body is going to tend to have the same response it had in the first place of, no, we don't want those, no, go away, right? We're going to be okay here, we have to function. So because our bodies are so committed to not experiencing, to not allowing us to consciously experience unpleasant emotions, once we've had a trauma that has not been quickly resolved, we tend to carry this bag of unfelt emotions, of hidden emotions, and we tend to just, more and more tends to go into the bag over time as we have other painful experiences. And so we're carrying around a lot of stuff that we can't even see or feel, but that is profoundly affecting us. So the hiding of emotions is one thing that happens during the traumatic experience. Another thing that happens is there's some need that's not being met. And so in addition to disconnecting from the terror or just the raw emotion, we actually disconnect from the need, right? Like if I become hungry, if for some reason as a young child something happens and I'm not fed for a long period of time and I'm hungry for hours or days, then my body will make that hunger go away, right? So I won't have this, I'll have this sense like, okay, I guess I really don't need to eat. Now, obviously with hunger, there's a limitation. Eventually I will die without food. But the intensity of the need just gets turned down so much. And with each need, it's the same thing. Whatever need wasn't met, there's a disconnection that happens from that need during the trauma itself. And of course, in trauma, there is a lack of adequate safety and support, right? If there was enough safety and support, then I wouldn't be having this experience of profound threat. So as a result of this very intense experience of trauma, I have emotions that I'm hiding from myself. And then also my relationship to my needs is changed. The need that I hid from myself during the experience, it might remain hidden for years or forever. And my experience of my needs in general might shift. I might go from being someone who says, okay, here I am, I'm here in the world and my needs are met, the world takes care of me. And after this experience of intense lack of safety, so much that it was overwhelming, I might in general feel like, here I am in the world and the world doesn't take care of me. Right? My needs may or may not get met at any point. Right? So, and I mentioned that right during the experience of trauma, there wasn't enough safety and support. And this experience can then affect my ongoing relationship with safety. I might never feel safe. And I might be overly cautious, right? I might just never ever leave my house. That happens to some people for sure. Or I might just become oblivious to threat because of the lack of safety. Because the lack of safety was so intense, I might disconnect from even my awareness of threats and risk, and I might be just walking around doing all kinds of risky things and not really even knowing they're risky because I've just turned off that whole department, right? Or I might be going around doing risky things knowing full well I'm taking risks. My response to the lack of safety is, oh well, if I'm not going to be safe, at least I'm going to be alive and I'm just going to take risks. So there's my relationship with safety is affected. And then my relationship with people, with my capacity for relationship with people is very much affected by trauma. Because as a small person, I expect that the big people in my life and in the world will keep me safe. And that failed to occur. And so now I may have difficulty trusting anybody. I may have difficulty being close to anybody. I may start to get close to someone and then at a certain point, like totally freak out and run away. Right? That my wiring, my programming for how to trust, how to know when to trust or not to trust, how to know, when to open up and when to shut myself down, all the stuff about navigating relationships, that whole arena is affected. And different people are affected different ways, but there's the capacity for building, maintaining, nurturing, breaking off relationships all in a healthy way that's compromised in some way or in many ways. And many people who have experienced developmental trauma, this is not necessarily true for trauma later in life, though it can be, but many people who experience developmental trauma end up with what is called, in the somatic experiencing world, it's called global high intensity activation of the central nervous system. Global, like full on, high intensity, right? Activation. So fight, flight. Yeah, it means my my sympathetic nervous system, there's this constant sense that something is wrong, something needs to be done, something's at risk. What do I need to do? What's going on? This constant push inside of our bodies that there's something is wrong, there's something I need to do. It's not okay. And because that is so intense, because it's related to these hidden emotions that were so intense, and it's not accurate, right? Actually, in life, for most of us, there isn't a constant onslaught of threats. So in response to this intense, oh yeah, what am I going to do? Push. Then there's this other layer that's there that comes in like a freeze or a shutdown. It just says, okay, chill out, go away, be smaller. So that freeze turns down the volume on this intense pushiness, and it might lead to us actually feeling relatively calm. It might lead to us believing that we're really fine and okay. But under the surface, the push is still there and this freeze is there. And so it's like the metaphor that's often used for this is like the gas pedal is on the floor and the brake is to the floor too. It's not a perfect metaphor, but it'll work. So it's exhausting. I have lived with this condition of global high intensity activation throughout my life. It's exhausting. It's confusing. It's like I did this one training one time where we did this exercise and it was like I experienced this sort of being at war in myself, having this like conflicting emotions, conflicting agendas on every topic inside myself. So global high intensity activation, right? The push and the freeze on top of the push. And that is often a result of developmental trauma. Many people with developmental trauma have this global high presentation. And global high intensity activation is associated with syndromes like migraine and fibromyalgia and lupus and various sorts of weird or quirky medical or physiological symptomologies, because our nervous system wasn't designed to be on full tilt like that, right? And so our nervous system and our body can't properly function doing all the stuff they're supposed to be doing because they're so busy fighting against ourselves inside of ourselves. So that's another impact that developmental trauma can have. So how do we fix this? Right? I'm just going to briefly touch on a few points here because I'm going to do take several of these pieces and sort of do a talk on each one. So at a high level, how do we fix this? One of the things we need to address are these hidden emotions, all this stuff that we're blocking. And here's why. Our bodies and brains are working really hard to keep these painful emotions out of our consciousness, and they have a legitimate motive in doing that, but it happens at a cost. Right? The way that our bodies and or our brains prevent us from feeling these strong emotions that are actually there in our bodies is by not functioning properly. So our blood flow might be reduced, our breath might be reduced, the nerves might not communicate as effectively, right? Our muscles might sort of not, we might lose tension in our muscles or be over tight. The blocking this is work, and the work of blocking it, whatever specific form it takes, interferes with the healthy and good functioning of our bodies and our minds and our emotions. So finding a way to meet and greet and hold these intense emotions, to learn that while they feel overwhelming, we actually can tolerate them, right? To discover that, oh, I'm now an adult and, I actually can hold this. Some way of finding, working with, and addressing and holding those emotions, getting them out of hiding, is one important element of the recovery from developmental trauma. Another absolutely important element is safety and support. We need to be able to feel safe. And another element is relating to other people, being able to relate adequately to other people, being able to be met adequately by other people, to be seen and heard and witnessed. And the safety and the relationship, of course, relate to each other very much, right? It's difficult to feel safe if there aren't any human beings in the world with whom I feel seen. And of course, it's going to be difficult to do that emotional work unless I have some safety and some relational support. And part of the relational piece is that we need to be seen, heard, respected, believed, and mirrored and supported in our emotional experiences, both our awesome, wonderful emotional experiences and our difficult ones, right? We need more than just, just being not hurt by others. We need to be actively met, witnessed, like, oh yeah, I get that. I get what happened. I'm so sorry. Wow. It must have been, someone who can understand, someone who can resonate. So I feel like, okay, I'm not entirely alone in carrying this thing that I'm carrying, this thing that I experienced. And then another piece that's folded in here somewhere is life force energy. We need to find, a lot of us, right, in this freeze, right, the I need to do something, what's wrong, there's some life force energy in there. It's unpleasant and tense, but there is some, right, life in there. And then this freeze comes in and just, so many of us, like, we can barely even find our life force energy. We might even feel like we don't want to be here. And when we do feel the life force energy, it feels like this intense push, right? So one of the aspects of healing is finding a way to feel alive, to feel truly alive in a way that feels positive, and to sort of want to be here and to want to express and to know that there's some safety for me to do that. And one more piece is the agency, we need to have the experience that I can do things. And when I do things, it can be okay, right? I can do things and it can work and there can be success. So all of those pieces relate to each other, right? It's not like there's a certain order. It's like, in a certain way, all of them are prerequisites for the other. So we have to just sort of start somewhere, see what do we already have on board, right? Which of these pieces might I have some of already? And from there, sort of work on finding and reclaiming the others. And like I said, I will go into more detail in other more specific talks about this. So it is totally possible to recover from developmental trauma. It's not simple. It's not direct. There's not like a formula or hey, read this book or learn this system, and then you too will be free from the effects of your developmental trauma. It doesn't work like that. We're complicated, we're all different. But there are some commonalities, there are some themes, there are things we can try on to kind of see, okay, which things work for me? Which things help me to feel more safe, more alive? Which things help me to connect with, a sense of, yes, this is really me. So that's what we're going to be pursuing further. Thank you so much for listening and have a wonderful day.